She used to fill every room she walked into, not just with noise but with something you could feel, a force, an energy that made you stop, look, and lean in. For decades, Rosie O'Donnell was everywhere, the talk shows, the movies, the headlines, the heart of American pop culture. She was one of those rare people who felt like she belonged to everyone. And then she disappeared. No red carpets, no interviews, no late-night appearances, just silence. And the kind of silence that follows someone like Rosie O'Donnell isn't normal, it means something. Her fans felt it first. The comments flooded in. Where is she? Why hasn't she posted? Is she okay? Because they knew the way loyal fans always know that something wasn't right. And then the update came and it stopped people cold. This wasn't a celebrity taking a vacation. This was a woman who had clawed through public breakdowns, brutal on-air feuds, devastating personal loss, and health scares that nearly took her life, standing once again at the edge of everything. The question isn't just what happened to Rosie O'Donnell. The real question is, how did someone this loud, this powerful, this unstoppable end up here? Because what lies beneath the surface of her story goes deeper than any headline ever captured. The fame, yes, but also the fractures, the grief she buried under laughter. The pain she performed her way through for 30 years. And the truth, the full, complicated, heartbreaking truth about where she is right now. By the end of this, you will never see Rosie O'Donnell the same way again. Rosie O'Donnell didn't stumble into fame, she fought for every inch of it. She grew up in Kamak, New York, a working-class kid with a loud mouth and a bigger heart. And then, when she was just 10 years old, her mother died of breast cancer. A 10-year-old girl losing the one person who was supposed to be her whole world. That kind of wound doesn't close, it becomes part of you, and for Rosie it became fuel. She was doing stand-up comedy as a teenager while other kids were going to school dances. She was performing in clubs while her peers were figuring out who they were. She already knew who she was. She was the funny one, the loud one, the one who made the pain disappear by making other people laugh. By her 20s, she was impossible to ignore. The 1990s turned her into something close to royalty, a league of their own, Sleepless in Seattle, role after role that showed she wasn't just funny, she was magnetic. But it was the Rosie O'Donnell Show, launched in 1996, that changed everything. She became the queen of nice, warm, funny, accessible. The kind of host who made every guest feel like the most important person in the room. The ratings were enormous. The Emmy Awards came year after year. She was, by every single measure, one of the most powerful women in the entertainment industry. But even at the peak, something wasn't right. Rosie has talked about it in interviews over the years, the depression that never really left her. The weight of always being on, always performing, always giving. She described it as exhausting in ways that were almost impossible to explain. The public Rosie, bright, generous, relentless, and the private Rosie were two completely different people. Nobody wanted to see the private version, not back then, so she kept giving them what they wanted, but cracks don't stay hidden forever. When Rosie joined The View in 2006 as a co-host, everything shifted. She wasn't there to play nice anymore, she was there to speak. About politics, about the war in Iraq, about power and hypocrisy, and the things she believed in with every bone in her body. And that put her directly in the path of co-host Elizabeth Hasselbeck, who believed just as passionately in the opposite direction. For months, the tension built, quietly at first. Then not so quietly, and then in May of 2007, it exploded live on air in front of millions of viewers. The confrontation was raw, real. Two women at an absolute breaking point, not holding anything back. Rosie felt betrayed. She had put herself out there, her opinions, her anger, her most vulnerable truths, and she felt like she had been left to stand completely alone when it mattered most. She left The View shortly after. The official story was a contract dispute, but anyone who watched knew the truth. This wasn't about money. This was about a woman who had opened herself up to the world and gotten hurt for it. Again, what no one saw coming, though, was how much darker things were about to get. In 2012, Rosie O'Donnell had a heart attack. She was 50 years old, she was alone, and she almost didn't make it. She described it later with the kind of honesty that made you catch your breath. How she felt the warning signs and ignored them. How she talked herself out of calling for help. How close she came to simply not being here anymore. She used the experience to warn other women. Heart attack symptoms in women are different, they're subtle, they get dismissed. She may have saved lives by speaking up. But behind the health message was something more personal. A woman who had spent her entire life putting everyone else first, almost dying because she couldn't ask for help. She came back. She always came back, She returned to The View in 2014 hoping for a fresh start, but the behind-the-scenes reality was brutal. Reports of tension with producers leaked. The atmosphere was described as impossible. Once again, Rosie left, and then just as she was trying to rebuild, the floor completely fell out. In 2015, her estranged wife Michelle Rounds died by suicide. The two had separated. They were in the middle of a painful custody dispute over their young daughter Dakota, and now Michelle was gone. No one was prepared for that, not the public and certainly not Rosie. She sat with that grief mostly in private, which somehow made it worse to watch from the outside. This woman who had always been so loud, so present, so relentlessly visible, suddenly going quiet in the face of something too heavy to perform through. The woman who had made America laugh for decades was barely holding herself together. The years that followed were the quietest of her public life. She stepped back. She showed up occasionally, a social media post here, a brief appearance there. But the engine that had driven her for 30 years had stalled. Something was different. Something had changed in her in ways she was still figuring out herself. And then in 2021, she shared something she had kept to herself for a long time. She had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. She received the diagnosis as an adult, and she spoke about it the way you speak about something that finally makes sense of your whole life. The intensity, the difficulty reading social situations, the feeling of being wired differently from everyone around her. The moments that had been labeled as outbursts or overreactions or just Rosie being Rosie suddenly had a different explanation entirely. No one expected that revelation. And for a lot of people, it reframed everything. The feuds that had been mocked in tabloids, the behavior that had cost her friendships and opportunities and public goodwill. There was context now. A deeper truth that had been there all along, unseen. But even that wasn't the end of the pain. Her relationship with her daughter Chelsea became public in the most heartbreaking way possible. Chelsea had distanced herself from Rosie and made statements to the press that cut to the bone. Family estrangement is devastating under any circumstances. But when it happens in public, when the whole world is watching, it's a different kind of loss entirely. Rosie had survived the death of her mother, the collapse of her marriage. A near-fatal heart attack, a custody battle, a suicide that shattered her world, public rejection from an industry she had given everything to. And yet every single time the world decided she was finished, she was still standing. So when fans noticed the recent silence, the long gaps between posts, the absence from events, they weren't just curious. They were worried. Because they had seen enough of Rosie's story to know that silence for her was never a good sign. The update that began circulating wasn't about a scandal. It wasn't about a feud or a comeback project or a controversy. It was about health, her health, and it was serious enough to make people stop and pay attention. Those close to her described a woman in a different mode entirely, quieter, more deliberate. Choosing carefully what she gives her energy to after decades of giving everything to everyone all the time. She had been talking openly about therapy, about medication, about the long, unglamorous, deeply unsexy process of actually getting well, not performing wellness. Not telling people what they want to hear, but genuinely working through everything she had carried for 63 years. And here is the part that no one fully expected. The new update from people inside her world suggests that Rosie O'Donnell isn't fading. She isn't falling apart behind closed doors. She is doing something she has never truly allowed herself to do before. She is choosing herself, not the version of herself that the industry needed, not the Queen of Nice. Not the loud, controversial co-host who made great television, just herself. Complicated, imperfect, real, and finally at peace with what that means. That's not a downfall. That's not a breakdown. That's a woman who has been through more than most people could survive and has decided at 63 that she has earned the right to be okay. Rosie O'Donnell is still here. She has been famous for 4 decades and hurt in ways that fame never protects you from. She has made mistakes in front of millions and been judged for every single one. She has lost people she loved, fought battles she didn't always win, and carried grief so heavy it should have broken her. But she is still here, still speaking, still fighting, just differently now. For herself, for her peace, for the quiet life that she spent 30 years telling herself she didn't deserve. Whatever the next chapter looks like, one thing is absolutely clear. Rosie O'Donnell's story is not over. It's just finally being written on her own terms. And honestly, after everything she's been through, maybe that's the most powerful ending she could have written. So now we want to hear from you. Do you think the world was too hard on Rosie O'Donnell? Was she misunderstood all along, or did she make her own story more complicated than it needed to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everything you send us. And if stories like this one speak to you, real, raw, unfiltered celebrity stories that go beyond the gossip and get to the truth, hit that subscribe button right now. Because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you, and we're just getting started.